Hi, my name is Thomas Mosier. I'm the Chief of Police here in Piscataway. I'm joined by Mark Bulber, the Director of EMS for HMH JFK, and Captain Michelle Pilch, the Captain of our Support Division. I thought it would be a good time to gather and talk about EMS presentation in Piscataway after having been involved in our new relationship with JFK HMH, and just inform the residents of exactly what happens from the moment a call comes into Piscataway Police Headquarters to your units arriving on scene. So I'll begin by just asking Captain Pilch, how does dispatch receive a call, and then what happens after that?
So our dispatch is the center of our police department. They're responsible for handling all of our 911 calls and our non-emergency calls. So when a 911 call comes in, the dispatcher then takes or ascertains all the information related to the call to then dispatch a police unit and the proper BLS or ALS unit, or both.
Thanks. Mark, could you explain to us then what happens after our dispatch center transfers the calls to you?
Sure, Chief, and thank you for having me.
Certainly.
So once the call is handed off from your dispatch center, it actually comes over to our dispatch center in Edison. At that point, the call is screened, get the address, confirmation, and we then begin to send the unit right away before we ask any other questions. If there's any other information or anything additional that we need to know, we stay on the line and we obtain that from your officers in your dispatch center. And the ambulance is already en route. As you know, we have 3 ambulances in town, 24/7 at this point, and they're dispersed in strategic areas throughout town to make sure that there's adequate and even coverage everywhere. And if there's any more information from a safety perspective, or any more information that we can gain from the caller to better set up the responders when they arrive, then that's what we'll do while they're already on the way to the job. But at that point, the wheels are already turning and help is already on the way.
We're going to get into it in a little while, advanced life support. Can you just explain to us, when is that decision made?
Sure, absolutely. So within the state of New Jersey, there are a couple of different call screening tools that are out there. And those call screening tools are designed to figure out the level of acuity. The sickest of the sick, the most serious emergencies, strokes, heart attacks, unconscious, cardiac arrest, they all need an advanced life support response. That's the paramedics. And the paramedics are a regional resource that come from the hospitals. In addition to the paramedics, they're also receiving the basic life support services, or the EMTs. And EMTs are more municipally based. Some EMT services are professional, some are volunteer, but most tend to be a municipal or a township resource rather than a regional resource like the paramedics. This is why in some cases you may see 2 ambulances rolling down the road side by side. Those are sick emergencies, the ones who need both the advanced and the basic life support.
So advanced life support is not part of Piscataway's and JFK's relationship. That's a separate dispatch from the hospitals?
That's correct. And here in Piscataway, there's a dividing line within town in which part of Piscataway is serviced by the advanced life support from Robert Wood Johnson, and the other part of Piscataway is serviced by the advanced life support from JFK Medical Center.
And that's been long-standing, right? If I'm
correct. No
yes.
changes there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. As we were speaking, just myself and Mark, there is a difference between BLS and ALS. BLS is basic life support, and as I was speaking, ALS is advanced life support. Captain Pilch, just briefly, what is BLS?
BLS is your basic life support. It's your, for lack of a better word, a lesser call. They're your fall victims, your accidental injury victims, things of that nature. Something that requires usually a non-transport. Sometimes it goes into a transport or ALS is contacted as well, but it's your basic care.
We characterize the squads as professional, a JFK squad or a Robert Wood Johnson squad. Is there a difference between what I'll call a professional squad from your organization or a volunteer squad? Is there any different training that they receive between a volunteer and a professional squad?
So there can be, and that varies based on the squad itself and based on the standards of care in that particular area. There is definitely a basic minimum. In order to be an EMT, everybody is trained to the same level to be able to administer oxygen, to be able to operate an automated external defibrillator, administer some medications like EpiPens or Narcan or things like that. But the level of training and the amount of time that's spent on training can differ from agency to agency. There are many volunteer agencies throughout the state that are incredibly professional and adhere to the same standards. And then there are some that do not. So ultimately, there is some variability there throughout the state of New Jersey, and that's based on home rule.
Right.
But we like to think that most of the BLS agencies that we partner with all kind of adhere to the same standard, and we're all out there for the same reason.
Very good. I know in the first month of our relationship, it's been a busy time. Could you comment on that, how many calls we've handled? And I know from internal emails some really great interactions that we've had with your people.
Definitely. So I can tell you that we've been surprised by the volume. I think the second day that we were up and running here in Piscataway, there were 2 separate collisions on 287, one of which I believe involved 6 patients and one of which involved 7 patients. So it was a rather
Trial
start
by
with
fire.
a bang kind of moment. Exactly. Since that time, I believe we've had about 280 responses, requests for service within the Township of Piscataway, and we've been averaging about 7 minutes and 20 seconds on those responses. I think that for the most part, what we've seen from our side is an amazing amount of collaboration. I can think of a specific cardiac arrest call that just occurred in which both of the providers on the HMH side actually commended the officers. I think excellent CPR was being done, perfect use of the bag valve mask, multiple shocks from the AED prior to our arrival, and that did result in a very positive outcome for that cardiac arrest patient.
If I'm not mistaken, they call that high quality CPR, right?
That's correct. Some people call it pit crew CPR, but high quality CPR is definitely the name of the game at this point. That's how people survive.
Good. That's it's very good to hear that the relationship is off to a good start and things are moving along. Sometimes you don't know how things are going to begin in the onset, and I'm really happy as chief of police to hear that.
And from our side, it's very welcome. Believe me, we cover ALS and BLS all the way from Southern Ocean County up into Union County, and not as many organizations as you would think on the police side are on board with helping out with medical jobs. So it really is a testament to you and to all of your department that you're that willing to get involved and do the right thing in that moment.
Thank you very much. We've moved towards a 5-year contract with JFK, HMH JFK. I think that there was some stability sought there. In the past, when we were with Robert Wood Johnson, they were Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Then the volunteer squads took over at 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. at night and weekends, and that was filled in by Robert Wood Johnson when the volunteers called out. And I've just recently learned that Hackensack Meridian also filled in on many of those calls. Could you comment on that just for a minute?
We did. So obviously we've always shared the border providing BLS services in Edison. And over the past 2 years, there have been about 225, 230 times where we were called into Piscataway. We averaged about a 9-minute response time at that point, a little further out because we didn't have units stationed within town.
Right.
But we always have had a very close relationship with Robert Wood Johnson, and much in the same way that we've supported them over the years, they've supported us when our mutual aid requests have come in as well. So it's been good.
And that is your mutual aid agreement is with Robert Wood. So if you can't supply ambulances in a mass casualty sort of incident, or when you didn't have enough ambulances right at that time, you would call Robert Wood.
Among others, definitely.
Okay.
In a mass casualty incident, the imaginary lines kind of go away and everybody's just focused on making sure the amount of resources match the amount of patients. But Robert Wood is often our first call, yes.
Okay. Captain Pilch, why don't you explain to us the history of ambulance service in Piscataway thus far?
Well, prior to our new contract with JFK, we had service provided by Robert Wood Johnson on a Monday through Friday basis. They provided service for the town from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then the volunteer rescue squads covered from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and on the weekends. Prior to Arbor permanently shutting their doors, we had service provided by Arbor, North Stelton, and River Road. Once they permanently closed their doors, we had 2 rescue squads providing service to the entire town, which were both located primarily on the southern side of town, which left a large area of coverage which needed to be filled.
How many times did the volunteer organizations call out of service?
I would say in the last year it was over 300 times that we had blocks of time called out for service. So they don't just call out a service for a call, for a specific call. What they would do is they would call out a service for a block of time or a block of days, and we would need to provide coverage from either Robert Wood or another agency.
After all of the changes that were coming fast and furious with EMS, with Arbor going out of service and the conclusion of the contract with Robert Wood Johnson, I felt that it was necessary to recommend to the mayor and the Township Council that we go to a 24/7, 365-day sort of arrangement. So with Hackensack Meridian already being active in the town, picking up calls when we needed you to, explain to us, Mark, how you decided to bid on this contract.
Sure. So ultimately what you're describing is something that we're seeing across the state as well. It is very difficult for volunteer services to continue, especially given economic climate, social climate, things like that. The pandemic certainly didn't help either. Let's be honest about that. True. So at the end of the day, this is not the first time that we've actually bid on a Piscataway contract. It had come up once in the past that we had thrown our hat in the ring, and obviously since that time supported Robert Wood while they were here. But it made sense for us. Hackensack Meridian Health has an urgent care here in Piscataway, and ultimately it's a contiguous border with many of the towns that we already provide BLS services to. We're invested in the community. We're interested in healthcare throughout Middlesex County, achieving a single high standard, and we believe we can play a role as part of the team that makes that happen.
As I said before when we spoke about the relationship so far, it's off to a flying start. I think this is a good opportunity for us, me as the chief of police, and I know the mayor and the township council support this, to thank the volunteers. And I know that many of the volunteers are Rutgers students, and I thank them for their service to the town. I believe that it's an honorable service. I was a volunteer fireman for Possumtown Fire Company for many years here in Piscataway, and it was a very good time during that time. My recommendation was based on the fact that I believed that we needed more universal coverage, so that's why we went out for that, and the mayor and the council obviously agreed by going out with that. So, following my recommendation to the mayor and the township council, there were 3 people who put in bids after our request for proposals. Robert Wood Johnson came in at $3.5 million, and River Road, transitioning from a volunteer model to a paid employee model, came in at $4.2 million. And then JFK came in at just a little bit over $1 million. Mark, could you comment a little bit on what went into the contract and what parameters are in it for you to follow?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you know, 3 ambulances are in town 24/7, 365. For us, this represents a little bit of a departure from the way that we normally deploy our ambulances, but they're in strategic places throughout town at this point to make sure that there is adequate coverage for all areas and all corners of town. I think, as I said before, we're at about 7.5 minutes at this point for most of our response times. I know the contract says that we will respond within 10 minutes, 90% of the time. So we seem to be doing well as we learn the ropes and get acquainted with our new surroundings. For us personally, I think that the subscription model that you have in place, where none of your residents who receive services are directly billed for the services, is an exemplary model. We don't see that a lot as far as municipalities go. So it is absolutely true that any resident or anybody that receives services within township limits will not receive a bill. But I do want to point out that in the case that insurance information is not obtainable on scene, they may receive a mailer to get that insurance information so that insurance can be billed appropriately. The other thing that I would point out is that, as we talked about before, ALS and BLS services are separate. So under the auspices of the contract, we're talking about the BLS portion of services. And once again, if you have ALS as well, that could be us or that could be Robert Wood.
Right.
So ultimately, I think from our perspective, we look forward to working with you to optimize the service and really figure out the places where we can bring those response times down even lower. Perhaps find some new places where ambulance might be better situated to respond, because I think, as we all know, going screaming across town with your lights on and your sirens on. It's not just dangerous for the providers, but it's dangerous for the community as well.
Right, that's a very good point. I know that we're working on a location on the north side of town, which is already a township-owned building, so we will continue to work on that, and that'll be a nice stationing place for you to have your ambulance 24/7. Could you please just comment real quickly on the equipment that you've provided us in our dispatch center, the radios and the computer program that shows us where your ambulances are?
Sure. So we definitely believe in full transparency, and we think that's really one of the only ways to establish trust early on. We're looking forward to a very long partnership together, and ultimately we felt that one of the things we could do right out of the gates was provide you a program that allows you to see where our ambulances are at all time. Not only does it ensure that the closest unit is being dispatched to every emergency, but it also ensures that we're meeting our obligations from our side of the contract. So I know that that program is up and running within your police dispatch center at this point.
Yes.
And we operate on the police P100 radio system, which definitely has its perks as far as coverage goes and as far as continuity goes, so that we can always make sure that we're in very close contact with you and with our units. And ultimately, we did work to make sure that that radio frequency and that the ability to communicate on that channel was something that your police dispatch center was capable of doing as well, to make things as seamless as we could.
I know that there is a unit, a radio unit at each dispatch console in police headquarters, so that does make for a very fluid conversation with the units on the road. And I know the dispatchers love the computer program showing where the ambulances are, because as you get up and running in the town and get familiar with the surroundings, the dispatchers have pointed out, well, maybe this unit is closer to your people, and that just cuts down on response time too. So
certainly.
More examples of how the relationship is growing and getting even better as we move along. Captain Pilch, can you explain to us how 24-hour-a-day coverage benefits the residents of the township?
Well, 24/7 coverage provides continuous service for the entire town with a response time much quicker than a volunteer squad can be called out for.
I think that's a great segue into, can you move on to some of the problems that we were having with the volunteer rescue squads?
Well, like I said initially, the calls that they were calling out of service for these blocks of time or these blocks of days had to be covered by somebody else.
Can you talk a little bit about when a rescue squad calls out of service, how is that handled in the dispatch center, and what problems does that raise as they try to handle a 911 call for EMS?
Well, first they call out of service and we document on our end, and then the information is passed from dispatch to dispatch. So if they're calling out of service for a block of days, we have to track that from one shift to the next. So we have to be able to make sure that the dispatcher knows that that squad isn't in service, so they're not called first. And then we have a bigger lag in time for our response. Then they have to find a secondary response unit, such as Robert Wood or JFK, to then respond to the location, who at that point are typically coming from outside of town.
Mark, can you comment on a recent call that we had over here at our senior housing regarding a call for EMS and advanced life support?
Sure. I believe the call you're talking about was in Sterling Village, and one of the things that had come into our dispatch center over the weekend was the idea that we may have been responding to that emergency from outside of town. Our supervisor received the call, and this is one of those instances where that program that allows for that transparency is very useful, because on your side and on our side, we were able to very quickly dispel that myth. A unit that was coming from outside of town, which was responding from Franklin, was the advanced life support unit in that case, and it was a Robert Wood unit. We actually don't have a presence in Franklin, so there would be no reason for one of our ambulances to be there. However, I can tell you that from our side, we're not infallible, and we certainly admit to the mistakes when they do happen. So were that the case, it would have been an opportunity for improvement, but as contracted, we had 3 ambulances in town, and I believe the response time was right around 6 minutes on that one.
And advanced life support is not covered by our contract with HMH, right?
Correct. And as a regional resource, advanced life support and the paramedics are usually a little bit slower to the scene than the basic life support. This is because they're not situated in every town. They could be crossing multiple towns to get to you. So in many ways, BLS is the first resource on scene along with police, along with PD. And a lot of the early initial stabilization happens at that basic life support level. Very proud of the standard of care that our EMTs are able to bring to every job and the swiftness with which they bring it.
It's funny that you bring up the standard of care with the EMTs. I just recently found out that almost all of your supervisors are paramedics. Can you comment on that real quick?
Sure. So our dispatch center, which is located at Talmadge Road in Edison, has a supervisor on duty 24/7, 365. And throughout the course of every single day, we either have 1 or 2 field supervisors in the central region in Middlesex County. Most of our supervisors are the advanced life support level, the paramedic level. We do have some BLS EMT supervisors as well. But it's an additional layer and an additional resource for response when it's the busiest of times or as a spotter on the side of the highway, which many of you know is one of the most dangerous jobs that we encounter,
yes.
Both for the patients and for the responders. So we really do pride ourselves on being able to offer that additional layer of support for not only the patients in need of care, but also for the responders who are providing the care.
I think that's a huge benefit that's not mentioned anywhere in any of the contracts or any of the paperwork, but is a huge benefit to the residents and to everyone involved, the officers and the EMTs, that there's a higher level of medical care there on the scene quickly. I thank you both for joining me today. It was an enlightening conversation, and I think that the relationship that we're building will last for 5 years and hopefully beyond. So thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you for having me.